Can I say a very good afternoon to everyone participating in this Zoom call? I say good afternoon from London, and I welcome you all wherever you may be, in whatever region of the world, and in whatever time zone. The numbers of participants are creeping up still further, and it's a delight that so many people want to come together today in order to recognize the life and the legacy of our dear friend Johan David van der Vyver, a legendary human rights scholar, an anti-apartheid activist, and for so many years, professor of international human rights law at Emory University School of Law. He died in May of this year in Pretoria at the age of 89. We are indebted to Johan's daughter, Yolanda, herself now a very distinguished board member of the African Consortium for Law and Religious Studies, who has been foremost in organizing today's tribute. And I particularly want to thank John Bernau and his colleagues at the Center for the Study of Law and Religion at Emory University for allowing this meeting to take place and for giving to us their very considerable technical assistance. We're going to hear a series of pre-recorded personal tributes from friends and colleagues of Johan, focusing on different aspects of his life, his scholarship, and his enduring friendship. When we have completed all of those video clips, there will be the opportunity for participants on this Zoom call to add their own reflections or to comment in effectively a Q&A session at the end. And if you'd care to put your thoughts in the chat box, I can pick those up as we go along. And those of you who do want to speak, we can open the audio to you in due course. And you can add your own observations, reflections, and tributes to Johan when we've finished with the video recordings. We intend the overall webinar to be no more than an hour and a half, and I'll bring matters to a close in due course. For those of you who might benefit from having, as it were, a written transcript, you can use the caption feature, which is somewhere along the foot of the screen you have in front of you. And by clicking on that, you will have an automatic real-time transcription coming up on the foot of the screen if for any reason the sound quality is poor. So do please avail yourself of that as you go along. And we do very much look forward to hearing from as many of you as possible in paying tribute to the life and the legacy of our dear friend, Johan van der Vyver. I want to start straight away with the first of these several video recordings. And it's appropriate that our first one should be Professor John Witte, who is the director of the Center for the Study of Law and Religion at Emory University, where Johan taught so successfully from 1995 right up until the spring semester of this year. So we'll now run the video of John Witte.
It is bittersweet to think wistfully about my late great friend and brother, Johan van der Vyver. I join Elma, Yolanda, and the rest of the van der Vyver family in lamenting his death. I join them and the rest of the world in celebrating his remarkable life and career. I first encountered Johan some 45 years ago in 1978. I was a young college student at the time, and I wrote to him out of the blue for advice about the study of law, religion, and human rights. From his home in South Africa, he sent me a thick packet of writings, including a generously autographed copy of his brand new title, 7 Lectures on Human Rights, which still sits proudly on my shelf. I last saw him this past spring when he came to my office at Emory Law School and handed me the final manuscript of his latest tome, International Human Rights, which proved to be his last tome as well. A few days later, he left for his home in Pretoria, but sadly passed away after some time with his family. Johan was a giant in the legal academy, with high standing around the globe for his brilliant contributions to many fields of legal study. His early work ranged across property law, family law, the law of persons, church-state relations, legal science, and legal philosophy. In the 1970s, he began mastering human rights while serving as a visiting scholar and lecturer at Columbia, Michigan, Harvard, and the Institute for Advanced Legal Studies in London. This new accent in his work soon got him in trouble with both the conservative churches of his community and the apartheid state of South Africa. Many local Protestant churches thought human rights to be a dangerous product of Enlightenment liberalism and individualism, which biblical Christians should firmly reject. But Johan argued powerfully and patiently to the contrary, that human rights are God's gifts to human nature, which should be enjoyed and exercised by every human being, regardless of color, class, or confession. The apartheid state, in turn, reserved human rights to the white elite, leaving vast portions of South African society trapped in dire poverty, illiteracy, and oppression, with little legal recourse or protection. Johan risked much in speaking out against these racist and apartheid policies, using the spotlight of human rights to expose the grave injustices that these state policies inflicted. He was soon censored and then dismissed from his position as dean at the University of Potchefstroom and became a professor of law at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. While now a pariah in some conservative communities, Johan became a powerful anti-apartheid voice in South Africa and a global champion of human rights. In 1976, he flew to New York City and walked in without appointment to the Ford Foundation offices, asking them to support the burgeoning human rights movement in South Africa. They eventually gave him several large sacks of cash to continue the effort. In 1979, he organized the first great international human rights conference in South African history, hosting it in the glorious city of Cape Town and introducing the world to a still regional hero at the time, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Throughout this time, he argued constitutional cases in the South African courts on behalf of racial, cultural, and religious minorities, and he remained one of the legal architects of the anti-apartheid campaigns and later constitutional reform movements of South Africa in the 1980s and early 90s. Johan's work soon attracted the attention of President Jimmy Carter and his human rights team at the Carter Center at Emory University. Starting in 1990, they invited him to make regular visits to Emory and then appointed him in 1995 as the Senior Fellow of Human Rights at the Carter Center. Emory Law School, in turn, appointed him as the I.T. Cohen Professor of International Law and Human Rights, and we appointed him as Senior Fellow in our Center for the Study of Law and Religion. And the two of us, Johan and I, worked together for the next 2.5 decades on a whole series of major projects on democratization, human rights, religious freedom, proselytism, children's rights, and much more. You could always count on Johan on your right-hand side as you organize projects. Once established at Emory, Johan took on several new subjects for him, notably public international law, international humanitarian law, and international criminal law. He followed his trademark method of learning by doing, as he took each of these topics and wrote voluminously on each of them and created a whole series of new courses, seminars, and public lectures on point. In the last 5 years of his life, he completed 6 massive volumes on these international law topics. All along, he still taught a 4-course load, gave 4 or more public lectures around the world, published at least 4 major articles, and flew 4 times back and forth to South Africa as if he were commuting from Atlanta to Miami. On some of these recent trips back to his native land, Johan finally got his just due, as he was decorated with all manner of academic awards, tributes, and citations, including an appointment as Professor of Law Extraordinaire at the University of Pretoria. And in sublime acts of sweet justice, the University of Zululand gave him an honorary doctorate for his courageous advocacy for Black South Africans, and eventually his own alma mater at the University of Potchefstroom gave him an honorary doctorate for his courageous prophecy to white South Africans. The world has lost a quiet, gentle, and brilliant giant. I have lost a dear friend. God rest his good soul and give continued comfort to his family in South Africa and to his family here at Emory, where he was a vital member for so many years.
John, thank you so much for encapsulating in those few short words, I think, what many of us as professional colleagues thought of Johan. And certainly I would very much agree that one could always count on Johan as a professional colleague at your right-hand side in every project that was contemplated and delivered. I want to move from Emory to South Africa, the country of Johan's birth, where he spent most of his life, and to hear next from Professor Christa Rautenbach, professor at Northwest University in South Africa at the Potchefstroom campus and an advocate of the High Court of South Africa. Christa Rautenbach.
Good day. It is with a great sense of loss that I stand before you today to celebrate the remarkable life and enduring legacy of Professor Johan D van der Vyver. My journey into the world of law began in the 1980s at the Potchefstroom campus of the Northwest University, known then as the Potchefstroom University of Christian Higher Education, or the PUCA. It was during these formative years that I first encountered Johan's work. Legal education at PUCA was unique, rooted in a Christian philosophical framework that introduced us to the teachings of John Calvin and also Herman Vyver. To us, it felt like a rite of passage, especially when confronted with Johan's co-authored textbook, Introduction to Legal Science, based on Vyver's philosophy of the law idea. This textbook, though initially daunting, laid the foundation for our understanding of the law's philosophical underpinnings. It introduced the concept of a fixed transcendent point of departure, an Archimedean point, which influences one's thinking without even knowing that it does. It is here that Johan's impact on our understanding of the law began, shaping our theoretical perspectives on the law's role in society. Johan had a long and storied connection with PUCA. He pursued his academic journey here, earning his BCom degree in 1954, LLB in 1956, and an honors in philosophy in 1965. I was only 3 years old at that stage. In 1958, he became a lecturer, eventually becoming the head of the Department of Philosophy and later the Dean of the Faculty of Law, an honor that was bestowed upon him during his absence. Although he moved to Wits in 1978 due to political disagreements, he remained connected with his colleagues at the PUCA. Even as he continued his academic journey at Emory University School of Law in Atlanta in 1995, he never forgot his roots and always made time for visits and interactions with his former colleagues whenever he was in South Africa. In 1999, I had the honor of contributing to an issue of the Bulletin for Christian Scholarship, Koers, dedicated to him. Johan's belief that Christianity and human rights were not exclusive but intertwined was a powerful message. He argued passionately that human rights are God's gift to humanity, meant to be enjoyed by everyone, regardless of race, class, religion, or sexual orientation. In 2003, the circle was beautifully completed when Johan received an honorary doctorate from the Faculty of Law at PUCA, the faculty which he was once at odds with. Johan was renowned for his unwavering dedication to criticizing human rights abuses and injustices. He will be remembered not only for his scholarship, but also for his compassion and the void he leaves behind. As we remember and celebrate the life and legacy of Professor Johan D van der Vyver, or Prof Van, let us carry forward the lessons he imparted, the ideals he stood for, and the kindness he showed to us all. Prof Van, rus in vrede. Ek sal jou nooit vergeet nie.
Well, thank you very much for that description of Johan, and in particular, the understanding of a man who stood so resolutely for the passionate things in which he believed, and his transformation from pariah to prophet in his own land. It's always good to hear from the inside just the way in which Johan was so highly regarded. Let me remind those many participants who wish to say and make a comment in due course that the opportunity is there within the chat feature and within the Q&A feature, which are both enabled on this Zoom call. And we would welcome other viewpoints and other memories of a man who clearly had an enormous impact on the lives of so many of us who have studied in the field of law and religion and in the wider academic discipline. And with that in mind, I want to move next to a recording by Professor Cole Durham, who will be known to many as the founding director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University. He is also a past president of the International Consortium for Law and Religion Studies. And alongside Johan, Cole sat on the board and continues to sit on the board of the African Consortium for Law and Religion Studies. So our next speaker is Cole Durham.
It's a real privilege for me to speak at this event, paying tribute to a great friend, scholar, and mentor. I first met Johan at a major conference at Emory in the 1990s, and this led to the two-volume work that was entitled Religious Human Rights in Global Perspective, and Johan, of course, edited the Legal Perspectives volume. This was really a truly great work, and is just characteristic of the kind of work that Johan always did. I remember a visit he made to a Central European University in Budapest, typical of Johan visiting scholarly places all over the world. I remember him introducing me to the work of Abraham Kuyper and the idea of sphere sovereignty, which was critical in his own thought about religion-state relationships. I also remember his help in gathering materials about South African church-state law. Johan was an expert on so many things, particularly international human rights, but also a great scholar of religion, church, and state. I have a particular memory of his role at the very beginning of the creation of the African Consortium for Law and Religion Studies. I remember a dinner one night, probably at another conference. I can't remember at this point exactly which one, but he and Kofi Quashigah and Peter Kurtzen and I met together at dinner and talked about the possibility of forming an African consortium. I think that the first two events occurred at the institutions of Kofi and Peter, and they have played a great role in the growth of this organization over time. I can tell you also, I know from personal experience of Johan's commitment to the organization. Each year he would come, almost always I remember, at his own expense, using his own scholarly funds to make space for others so that it would be possible to bring more people to the event. Johan was always a consummate scholar. It amazed me how much on any occasion he could come up with a new topic which he would add great substance and depth to. He was a leading expert on international human rights law, but more than that, he was really someone who embodied the human rights tradition and commitment to that tradition. What an honor it is for me to have known him.
Well, I think Cole speaks for all of us on this call in speaking of the honor and the privilege it was to have known Johan and to have counted him as a friend. Cole introduced us briefly to the African Consortium for Law and Religion Studies, in relation to which Johan was such a significant and enduring presence. And for our next presentation, we want to hear from the president of ACLAS, the African Consortium. And therefore we hear from Professor Kofi Quashigah, who is the former dean of the law school at the University of Ghana. And he will tell us a little bit of Johan's involvement in the formation of ACLAS and in making it the enduring success which it has been as the central forum for discussion, the length and breadth of Africa, of issues concerning law and religion. So our next presentation, Kofi Quashigah.
ACLAS very much appreciates this opportunity to say a few words in memory of Professor Johan van de Vyver. With the demise of Professor van de Vyver, ACLAS lost one of his founding fathers. He was there when the idea of ACLAS was conceived. Indeed, the initial discussion of the idea of forming ACLAS came at a dinner with Cole, Johan, Pieter and me. He was an initial board member and served on the board until the Nairobi conference when his extended term expired. He was an extremely diligent board member, very seldom missing a board meeting. Even when he could not attend our annual conference, he still prepared a presentation and had his daughter Yolanda present it on his behalf. At our monthly virtual meetings, he was always there at his table, listening very attentively. He was quite spoken, but when he did say something, everyone listened, as he had a broad knowledge and great insight. He was widely respected. We are thankful that his daughter Yolanda is following in his footsteps and serving with ACLAS. We shall miss his wise counsel and quiet company dearly. May Prof. Johan rest in peace.
Kofi, thank you very much for explaining the debt which all of us who are involved in the African Consortium owe to Johan, not only for his quiet counsel, but also for his leadership, his vision, and his inspiration. We're going to have a slight change in tone and content in the next presentation, which takes the form of a dialogue, a conversation between two South African academics who work closely with Johan and who want to say a little bit about the work he did, the values he shared, and the contribution that he made in encouraging and mentoring other students and those he came across within the academic environment. They will give their own introductions in the course of the video clip, but we're now going to hear in dialogue Professor Pieter Duvenage, who has been the Dean of Humanities at Academia in Centurion, South Africa, since 2019, and is currently Extraordinary Professor of Philosophy at the Northwest University in Potchefstroom. In conversation with Professor Andries Raath, Senior Professor Emeritus in Public Law and Philosophy of Law at the University of the Free State. So our next recording are these two distinguished professors in conversation.
So it's for me a big privilege this morning to be involved in this conversation with my colleague and friend, Professor Andries Raath from the University of the Free State. I am Pieter Duvenage from Academia, a private tertiary institution, and we're going to reflect from a definite South African perspective on the legacy of Professor Johan van der Vyver. And Andries, we thought it well just to deal with two questions. And I'm going to ask the first question to you. We don't have so much time. And the first question is on the background of Johan van der Vyver, born 1934. He left us this year in 2023, thus a very long life. Myself, I only became aware from him, about him, as a young school scholar in the late 1970s, articles about him on apartheid and so on, but you were a student of him. Can you just sketch your impressions of Johan van der Vyver, the background where he's coming from, and your experience as a student of Johan van der Vyver?
Thank you, Pieter. Yes, my reminiscences of Johan van der Vyver date back to 1973, when I was an undergraduate law student at the then Potchefstroom University for Christian Higher Education. I also later became his junior colleague for a brief period at the same university. Johan was a true gentleman in the classical sense of the word, both to his peers and to his students. He was a committed academic and an exceptionally productive scholar. Outstanding scholar in both his publications and his public lectures and addresses. And I remember him as a person who not only preached justice, but he was also the epitome of a just and fair person. Perhaps the lasting recollections I have, Pieter, are those of his exceptional ability to convey very complex philosophical concepts in a lucid and clear fashion. This applies to the principles he wished to instill in the minds of his students in his introductory lectures in law and legal theory. The most vivid recollections I have of Johan's lectures are those presenting the fundamental principles of the cosmonomic idea. He referred to the coram deo character of all aspects of culture and the calling to find Christianity-inspired alternatives to the sinful distortions of reality. He also emphasized the lordship of Christ over all areas of life and the clarity with which he guided students through the terminological jungle of the philosophy of the cosmonomic idea and to explain its philosophical concepts in a very practical manner remains with me to this day. His critique also of the dogma of the pretended autonomy of theoretical thought, the cosmonomic idea, and his modal analysis of the structures of reality. He was one of the few lecturers who succeeded in ingraining these philosophical concepts permanently in the minds of his students. He was uncompromising on academic standards, and he was an outstanding mentor in the classical sense of the word.
Yeah. Andries, I thank you very much for that good introduction. So for our American audience, we must also maybe just say that it's fascinating to situate Johan within the South African intellectual history. And we have also, philosophically speaking, a very interesting history from the 19th century into the 20th century. And Johan came from the Potchefstroom tradition, which is, as you say, you use the cosmonomic idea there, but it's a reformational tradition that has been very strong at Potchefstroom, and the legal philosophy or legal studies was also influenced by that. I think that is what you've just said. I don't know if you just want to elaborate a little bit more on the first question, and then we can move to the next question.
Pieter, no, I think those are the prominent recollections I have of Johan, and what I could contribute, I would like to add when we discuss his lasting legacy.
Yeah, and that is then the second part of our short dialogue here this morning that will be later used by our colleagues at Emory for the very important, I think, broader reflection on Johan van der Vyver and his legacy. Now, this brings us to our last, second and our last question, and that is, what is his legacy? What is his thinking legacy? And as far as I understand reformational thinking, and here you must help me and add, etc., I would just like to bring out three aspects. And the first is that reformational philosophy, as I understand it, normally works with a non-reductive ontology. That also emphasizes, and I think you've already mentioned it, the aspectual aspect of a reality, you know, that there are many aspects. And then the second, for me, the important thing of Van der Vyver's thinking is the political aspect that runs, you know, that flows out of that ontology. And that is to be against centralist politics in a multicultural society, and a kind of pluralism and democracy from the bottom upwards, if I can put it that way. I don't know if that helped you a little bit. It gives us a background. We've got about 4 minutes left that you can maybe add to these systematical points of his legacy. And if you want to add other things, you're absolutely welcome.
Pieter, yes. Pivotal to Johan's lasting legacy was his appeals to justice and maintaining the, what I personally prefer to call, the normative ontological grid of reality. Johan never neglected to emphasize human responsibility in forming legal cultures. And in his reflections on the positivization of legal principles, he always highlighted the human process of building various cultural forms, which are attempts to respond to or bring into concrete actuality the law of creation, as he explained it. For example, in politics, there may be a universal principle of justice ordained by God as the law for political activity, but this principle becomes formulated, or then, as Johan would call it, positivized in actual legal structures which govern the life of society, including the structure of the agency whose task it is to administer justice, namely the state. Such positivized laws being human responses to the creational law. Johan emphasized that the structures of creation are thus always positivizations of structures for creation. This means that we can never elevate any particular historically variable structure of, say, the state, for example, the modern liberal democratic model, or the family, for example, the 20th century suburban nuclear model, to the status of a constant structural law for creation. Johan's insights into the value of the cosmonomic views on positivization of legal principles provided him with a solid basis for pointing out the value of the law positivization distinction as a safeguard against both historicism, which can be seen as an attempt to ascribe universally abiding law status to historically variable structures of creation, and on the other hand, libertarianism, in which the reality of universally abiding laws for human life is simply denied. His criticism of unjust laws always appealed to his views on reductionism and the cosmonomic modal analysis to which you referred. Reductionism to Johan occurs when the law for one aspect of creation is taken to be the law for another. The question of reductionism was also one important feature of the existential and philosophical context for the notion of irreducible modes of reality. And he applied his criticism of reductionism particularly to issues relating to the transgression of the normative boundaries of social entities, particularly the state. By invoking the principle of sphere sovereignty, he followed the lines of Groen van Prinster and Abraham Kuyper. That meant indicating that different societal institutions, the state, family, church, school, etc., have unique and lawfully delineated areas of sovereignty or authority, which must not infringe on the jurisdiction of other institutions. The state, for example, should function within its proper limits. For Kuyper, that meant, among other things, the state should not have exclusive control of education. What for Kuyper was a creational principle for social life on a Vyver, following Vyver, extended as an ontological principle for the totality of the cosmos. A reduction, in his view, is a violation of the sphere sovereignty of one aspect of the cosmos by treating it as if it were another. And I remember, Pieter, Johan on more than one occasion referring to the absolutization of a creational aspect as being idolatry, making one creaturely dimension the pivotal center of all of life, as an Archimedean point. In the public legal sphere, reductionism breeds injustice and undermines civil liberties because of state absolutization, or then political idolatry, as he would call it. The modal analysis of the cosmonomic idea provided him with a context for arguing that the structures of individuality can be distinguished from each other in terms of the modal aspects, which appear to play a characterizing role in the overall functioning of things or relationships. This provided Johan with a platform for positing the law state over against the power state. And he was particularly critical of the doctrine that might is right. Because the state has a juridical qualifying function, its calling should pursue justice, and this should shape its particular structure and guide its activities, and is founded in the organization of power. The state should pursue justice by means of organized power. Justice or right leads and sets limits, Johan would add, to the employment of power or might. And to describe the state as simply and especially dominant power organization is to deny its intrinsic nature, or, in Van der Vyver's terms, to violate its structural principle. His appeals for the protection of civil liberties under the Constitution was solidly based on his stance against reductionism and the structural integrity of social entities. A message I personally think very important for our own times universally, but in particular also for his home country, South Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andries. I think you gave a very good, succinct description of the main aspects of Johan van der Vyver's thinking, and as it is also relevant for a country like South Africa, the country of his birth, but I think also a country where he taught in the last years of his life, America, the United States of America, that very important republic in the north, we're looking from the south, that also has very important responsibilities in this regard. So it was for me wonderful to talk to you. It was a very brief dialogue, but I think we tried to give some kind of sketch of Johan van der Vyver and the greatness of his thinking, the importance of his thinking, not just for our context, but internationally. And I would like to thank you as a wonderful interlocutor to just bring something forward in a very short dialogue of our appreciation and our respect for the man and the intellectual that Johan van der Vyver was, and that will live on amongst us as long as we defend these principles that you have outlined.
Thank you, Pieter. That was a privilege.
Thank you very much, Andries. And that brings then our dialogue, our short dialogue, to an end.
A short dialogue indeed, but I think one from which we learned so much about Johan as a scholar and as a teacher. I think many of us will agree that one of Johan's great gifts was his capacity to make complex issues comprehensible and accessible to others. And the way he brought subjects alive through generations of students is something we will long remember. And just as the memory of Johan was sufficient to trigger the conversation that we've just enjoyed, I imagine that throughout the world, for years to come, people will meet and remember and recall the extent to which Johan influenced their thinking, their worldview, and their understanding of law and other issues. I've been trying to keep half an eye on the chat feature of this Zoom call while we've been watching these various presentations, because there will be time at the conclusion for other people to give their observations and their reflections. And I know that Christy Green, long-standing colleague and collaborator of Johan, has mentioned two aspects which might merit further discussion and reflection. The first is the issue of patriotism, which can be looked at in many ways. One way is, of course, a patriot such as Johan, proudly South African, but fiercely critical of the injustices he perceived within the apartheid system, and how it's possible to be both patriotic and critical of a regime is a dilemma which became a lived reality for Johan. And the other issue which Christy has raised, and which others may wish to take up when we finish listening to the pre-recorded sessions, is the question of exile. I spoke in slightly biblical language about Johan being a pariah who then becomes a prophet. And it would be interesting to see whether those who knew Johan, whether in South Africa or in the United States, might want to reflect upon the extent to which he perceived himself as an exile or simply a citizen of the world. So do please continue that conversation within the chat facility. Do also use the Q&A facility and let me know that you have a remark to make, and I will try and include as many people as possible when we have heard from each of those with their pre-recorded contribution. So for the next of those, we move to Professor Trynie Boezaart, who is Professor Emeritus in the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria. So for her contribution, Trynie Boezaart.
If I think of Johan van Vyver, and I do so frequently, I think of him as one of the leading scholars that worked towards achieving one objective, namely justice for all. While many of us may share this ideal, this brilliant but humble man had a very significant way to achieve exactly that. His career as a law teacher started in Potchefstroom in 1958, from where his research was launched. His first book was published in 1972, and it dealt with the relationship between the church and the state. His doctoral degree from the University of Pretoria followed in 1974 with his thesis on human rights. This set the tone, and in his steadfast way, this activist became a human rights legend. Unfortunately, if you view it from the one side, or fortunately, If you widen the lens, his political view called an end to his deanship at his alma mater. In no time, Wits followed through and turned apparent loss into real gain. I first met him at Wits, where I attended a meeting of property law lecturers. He was the convener and one of the key speakers. He, amongst other things, taught property law at postgraduate level, and he went out of his way to mentor and empower postgraduates and young colleagues to enhance their knowledge and encourage research in his field. Many years later, I once phoned Johan on his birthday. And what was he doing? He was preparing to entertain his postgraduate students on South African wine after their research discussion there in Atlanta. The footprint that this teacher and mentor left after 60 years is not in sand. It is captured in dissertations and theses, in books and in research papers. Johan van der Vyver's scholarly career is very different from others. I find it fascinating that he mastered so many fields. Most of us delved into either private or public law. Here in South Africa, the structuring of law faculties into departments does not encourage scholars to reach beyond their departments. But nothing was beyond Johan van der Vyver's reach. He taught and researched law of persons, family law, property law, medical issues relating to law, legal issues relating to the church, human rights, philosophy, international law, and the list is not exhaustive. He mastered all. Allow me to substantiate with reference to one example. The first Afrikaans textbook on the law of persons that I know of, and the most comprehensive one, is Persone en Familiereg, in which Johan wrote the 400 plus pages on the law of persons, and Vyver authored the family law section. The first edition was published in 1980 and immediately prescribed to our first years. There were 3 editions, but somewhere along the line, this famous book landed me in hot water because Johan at the dinner table once referred to me as his biggest critic. Fact is, we agreed to disagree on the onset of a person's legal subjectivity. Johan adhered to the nasciturus rule, whereby legal subjectivity may, under certain circumstances, start before birth. And my viewpoint was, and still is, that birth always signifies the beginning of legal subjectivity. I skipped many years and turned to the time when I became the head of the Department of Private Law. For the first time, I had the opportunity to nominate a sterling scholar to the position of extraordinary professor of law at the University of Pretoria, while Professor van der Vyver took up this position in 2010, alongside all his duties and responsibilities at Emory. During June to August every year, he contributed to research discussions, lectured to child law students, human rights students, delivered expert lectures, and many more. Against this backdrop of his immense contribution to further research efforts in my department, I convinced him to lodge an application at the National Research Foundation for a rating. He acquired an A rating, in my view, the biggest honor and acknowledgement to be bestowed on a researcher in this country. I started out saying that I think of Johan so frequently. Last week, I was asked to say something about the 2023 decision of the Dutch Reformed Church Synod on same-sex relationships against the backdrop of the 2018 Gown case. And first and foremost in my mind was to revisit Johan's writings. I focused on his 2013 contribution, Constitutional Protections and Limits to Religious Freedom, in Durham's book. My loyal friend passed away, but his legacy, the work that he left us, will live on. Vita perit, labor non moritur.
Thank you very much for that. It's I think, so important for those of us who engage with perhaps one aspect, one facet of Johan's personality and academic contribution, is to remember just how universal and widespread his interests were. And it's incredibly useful to be reminded that in the field of law, he covered almost every field imaginable and was never satisfied at having a superficial knowledge. Anything he engaged with, he did so seriously and to the very best of his considerable ability. And what I take away from that last contribution was the idea that the great gift of Johan was to mentor and empower others. And I have come across so many people who have been mentored by Johan to such good effect and empowered by their encounters with him to produce work of such a high quality. Johan was an exceptionally humble man. He didn't look for his own reward. His satisfaction was seeing others perform to the best of their ability. And this nurturing, this mentoring, and this empowerment lay at the very heart of the man that we knew and we loved. Our next recorded reflection is from Professor Andries Raath, who is Emeritus Professor in the Department of Mercantile Law and the former Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria. So we'll now hear from Professor Raath.
Good day. My name is Andries Raath. I'm an Emeritus Professor at the University of Pretoria, and during my years as a full-time academic, I also served as the Dean of the Faculty of Law. Johan van der Vyver was my academic mentor when I studied towards a master's degree under his supervision. He was an extraordinary individual with a keen intellect and a remarkable work ethic. His love for the law as a science, his desire to learn and interpret knowledge as well as to create new insights were insatiable. This is evident from his exceptionally successful career, or rather his calling as a jurist. Johan distinguished himself by having a solid research foundation, also in disciplines other than law. Hence, his perspectives on the law reflected a broader understanding and a profound philosophical insight. His quest was for justice, as reflected in his comprehensive doctoral thesis on human rights, written with a strong legal philosophical premise. As an academic, he was an outstanding researcher covering multiple fields of specialization. His approximately 400 scholarly contributions, including books on a variety of law subjects that he all mastered, serve as clear evidence of his work and insights. He received numerous awards in both the national and international legal arenas, including honorary doctorates from several universities and many other accolades. As a lecturer, Johan covered various subjects, including legal philosophy and ethics, human rights, international law and international criminal law, the doctrine of subjective rights, property law, aspects of tort law, personal and family law, and the law and religion. During my years of master's studies, he became my academic mentor. As mentioned, a person I looked up to as he illuminated the path for me and for many other scholars of law. His respectful relationship with and direct and honest feedback to junior colleagues and students stood out. Like many other students, both at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels, I can attest that he was an excellent lecturer, a person who explained difficult concepts clearly. He encouraged debates and called on deeper thinking on complex issues in law and justice. Looking at the course of his professional career, It began as an undergraduate student at the former Potchefstroom University for Christian Higher Education, where Johan obtained his BCom, BI Honours and LLB degrees. After these studies, he entered academia at the Potchefstroom University. There he also served as the head of the Department of Legal Philosophy and later as the Dean of the Faculty of Law. During this time, he earned his doctoral degree at the University of Pretoria in 1974. His doctoral thesis concerning the legal foundations of the doctrine of human rights was a penetrating legal philosophical work, the first in-depth research on this subject in South Africa. The thesis ran into 1,277 pages. This profound philosophical work paved the way at a time when human rights were unpopular in South Africa. Today, our entire legal order is based on human rights, representing a higher pursuit of justice. True to his convictions, Johan spoke out against oppressive legislation, such as the controversial detention without trial measures. His views, however, did not enjoy the favor of the authorities at the time. He was requested not to write on these matters and was prohibited from giving lectures for a period. Nevertheless, the outcome of these events was that Johan, true to his convictions, found another academic home at the University of the Witwatersrand, or WITS as we call it, where he continued his academic work until he was 16 years old. Here he pioneered the establishment of an extremely successful and sought-after master's degree in property law. Later, however, his alma mater, under the new name of the Northwest University, honored him with an alumni award as being an academic ahead of his time, as well as an honorary doctorate. These awards served as a timely rectification of past wrongs against him. After his time at WITS, Johan was appointed at Emory University in Atlanta in 1995. He later became the full-time holder of the IT Cohen Chair in International Law and Human Rights, a position he held until his passing. Johan's perseverance and passion for his work over the decades reflected in his career and his life. At the age of 89, he continued to teach full-time at Emory in Atlanta, literally up to the end. He was set to finally retire at the end of this academic year after a remarkable career that spanned more than 60 years. A significant life moment as a legal academic was serving as the Human Rights Fellow of the Carter Center in Atlanta from 1995 to 1997. Although he had broader international legal interests in this phase of his life, he continued to contribute to the South African legal system. Over the last 2 decades, Johan was involved in my law faculty at the University of Pretoria, where he also served as an extraordinary professor in the Department of Private Law. His visits and contributions were always enlightening and appreciated by staff. During his visits, he participated in faculty debates, offered lectures to students, and contributed to various academic departments, as well as the Center for Child Law and the Center for Human Rights. One of his important contributions during this time was his speech at the widely attended debate on the debacle around Omar al-Bashir, who, when on an official visit to South Africa, evaded an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. Johan spoke strongly on this matter with a well-reasoned legal argument. At the time of his involvement with the University of Pretoria, Johan received the highest recognition as a researcher in South Africa when the National Research Foundation, the NRF, awarded him an A rating in acknowledgement of his contributions to legal science, both domestically and internationally. Apart from his deep insights and knowledge of the broad legal science, Johan was in general well-read and educated. He could engage in conversation with anyone on almost any topic. Taking everything into account, Professor Johan David van der Vyver can rightfully be described as a highly gifted and versatile academic, one with few equals. In conclusion, I salute him as an academic, my mentor, and as a fine and refined human being. I thank you.
Thank you so much for reminding us particularly at the way in which Johan has this unbending capacity to speak truth to power, to espouse views which were unpopular at the risk of being silenced and censored. And the joy is that Johan lived long enough to see the world change its arc to his view and to be reconciled with those institutions which sought to censor him and criticize him for his espousal of equality and other principles which we now value and hold dear. We've got two more recordings to play. One is a conversation, and the final one is a presentation from a very long-standing colleague of Johan. I remind you once more of the wish that as many participants as possible will have the chance to speak and reflect once the formal recordings have been played. I intend to come to Christy Green to invite her to speak. I hope Yolanda herself will give her reflections. But I do invite some of the 50+ participants the world over that we would love to hear your views and to hear how Johan is carried in your hearts and will be remembered. But our next presentation is a conversation between two individuals. Professor Jenny van Wyk, Emeritus Professor of Law and Research Associate at the University of South Africa, speaking with Professor David van Wyk, who studied law at the universities of Potchefstroom, Johannesburg, and South Africa, and who taught constitutional and administrative law at the University of South Africa. So let's eavesdrop for a moment on their conversation.
Professor Johan van der Vyver, his life and legacy. Hello, I'm Jenny van Wyk, and this is my husband David. We were both students of Professor Johan van der Vyver at different stages of our law journeys. We were also both professors of law at the University of South Africa for the best part of 35 years. Now we're both retired and live in Plettenberg Bay in South Africa. Today, we'd like to talk mainly about our experiences of Johan as students. Firstly, David, as an undergraduate law student from 1966 to 1968 at Potchefstroom University, now it's Northwest University, and me, some 20 years later, as a master's student from 1985 to 1986 at Wits, the University of the Witwatersrand. David, since you were first, won't you start? Thanks.
Thanks, Jeannie. When I arrived at Potchefstroom University in 1966, the law faculty was freshly established. Its staff complement was small, and the lecturers were expected to teach on a range of subjects. I sat for the law of persons in the first year in Johan's class, law of property in the second, and law of delict or tort in the third. I don't think I would be doing anyone an injustice if I say that Johan was the best. He was in his early 30s. He had the gift of clarity of thought and speech. He was, for us, Mr. Complex Ideas Made Easy. I was a poor listener, with thoughts easily wandering off, but Johan kept my attention, and I'm sure that of my fellow students as well. Johan was for us the complete package, the depth of his knowledge, the assured and measured way in which he spoke, the occasional real-life joke that he would crack, even at his own expense, and the respect with which he treated his students could not but leave a lasting impression. And I would venture a solid legal foundation in the minds and memories of his students. Unfortunately, for me at least, our contact over the years of our respective academic careers at different institutions was far too irregular. But thanks to his daughter Yolanda, we had a few opportunities in recent years to meet up and break the proverbial bread together. And at the same time, to be reminded why Johan van der Vyver was such a forming influence in the lives of his students. Thanks, Jeannie.
Thanks, David. I met Johan in 1985 when I enrolled for the master's degree in property law at Wits. At the time, a prestigious degree comprising 2 years part-time study of all aspects of property law. Johan was responsible for introducing this pioneering and specialized coursework and dissertation property law LLM program, one of the first of its kind in South Africa. Interestingly enough, Johan taught property law, not human rights law, as we knew later. His depth of knowledge and philosophical, theoretical approach in presenting this key subject challenged and stimulated me immensely. Sadly, though, his leadership of the program came to an end a year after I completed the degree, when in 1987 he was appointed at the Emory University as the I.T. Cohen Professor of International Law and Human Rights. We were a small class, and each and every one of my co-students at the time went on to excel in their legal careers. As David said, and I can say without hesitation, this degree certainly played a big role in shaping all of our careers. I am very proud of that Wits LLM. As David mentioned earlier, in later years we met up on a few occasions, but we were always kept up to date on his life and legacy, his remarkable life and legacy through Yolanda. We remember him with a deep respect and fondness for his profound and exceptional ability to interact with us as students. Thank you and goodbye.
I think I can say without question that the experience of those two students has been replicated so many times in America, in South Africa. There are thousands of individuals whose lives Johan touched in his teaching and with whom he remained a faithful friend, but an inspiration and a mentor. And if we search for a legacy for Johan, we don't need to look very far, because all of those students owe him an enormous debt for what they learned and how they learned it. We're moving towards our final presentation, after which I'm going to invite to speak first Christy Green and then Helena von Koller, who have already said a little something in written words within the chat function. But I hope to be able to bring them in, and although we won't see them, we will at least hear from them and hear their own reflections upon the life and legacy of Johan. And then I hope in the time that remains, there'll be a chance to hear from a few others as well. But our concluding contribution comes from a man to whom I owe personally an enormous debt of gratitude, because it was through our next speaker that I came to be introduced to Johan, a man, to be honest, I found gruff and intimidating on first acquaintance, but very swiftly I found the warmth and the generosity of the man who's been so beautifully described by all of the contributors to this webinar this afternoon. And it was the beginning of a mutually respectful and deep friendship. But our next contributor is Professor Jeremy Gunn, who is Professor of Law and Political Science at the University of Rabat, but who remains a senior fellow at Emory Law School and its Centre for the Study of Law and Religion. So to bring these pre-recorded tributes to a close, I call on Professor Jeremy Gunn.
Greetings, my name is Jeremy Gunn. I first met Johan van der Vyver 30 years ago. I'm sort of shocked to think about this myself. I met him at the World Conference on Human Rights that took place, the UN-sponsored UN Conference on Human Rights that took place in Vienna in 1993. And since that time, I met with him on several occasions. He's somebody who had an influence on me. I'm sure there are other people who are better prepared and better equipped to talk about his scholarship, which was somewhat aside from where I work. So I won't talk about that as much, but talk about some of the experiences that I had. When I met him in 1993, I was immediately impressed that some of us after a meeting took the tram out to Grinzing on the outskirts of Vienna to go have some drinks and enjoy ourselves. And I was standing next to Johan on the tram that was taking us out, and he mentioned that he had actually walked there earlier in the day, so he was taking his second trip. And I thought, I hope that when I'm his age, which I have now surpassed his age at that time, that I will be as active and as energetic as he was. That World Conference in 1993 was one of the forerunners of the conference that was held at Emory University in 1994, sponsored by Johan and John Witte. I just happened to see the program for that 1994 conference today. In my opinion, as having someone who has worked on religious freedom and human rights for now 30 years, that conference was particularly important in establishing a modern approach of legal analysis of human rights issues. And so it was the work of Johan and John Witte that had, I think, a very important influence. That conference, of course, led to the publication of the two-volume work, one of which was edited by John Witte and the other by Johan van der Vyver. The second thing I'd like to mention is when he recounted one of the experiences from his youth. Perhaps other people have mentioned this as well. But I remember, and I was very much affected by his statement that when he was a young South African student, he went to a conference somewhere in Africa. I don't remember where it was. And he said he went with the goal to try to explain to Africans how they did not really understand South Africa. This is, of course, during the time of apartheid. And he said he went to that conference and learned after a few hours that he was the one who did not understand South Africa, and that meeting fundamentally changed his life. I've mentioned that experience of Johan to students several times in classes to the point of it would be useful if they reflect on their own biases and prejudices and try to learn from experiences that others have. And Johan characterized that for me, somebody who was able to learn and to change his worldview. Last point I'll make is more of a personal anecdote, but he was driving me through the streets of Atlanta, Georgia many years ago, and he made the offhand comment that I think was partly ironical, partly cynical, partly horrified of how the houses were all facing in the wrong direction. And he said they're all facing north. And at that point, I had no understanding of what he was talking about. I have since learned his wisdom even on architectural placement, and I have just designed and constructed my own house here in Morocco, where I have now a southern-oriented house, which is able to maximize the heat in the winter and have the coolest possible place in summer. So Johan has had an effect on my life personally, academically, and he's had an effect on my budding architectural experience.
Well, there we are. The legacy of Johan in a new built house in Morocco. What a charming and upbeat note on which to finish those magnificent recordings. My thanks goes to all of those who have taken the time and trouble to record a tribute, and to the assistance we've had from John in Emory in running those so smoothly. We do have about 10 minutes in hand for a few personal reminiscences. I remind you of the Q&A feature that can be used. I suspect also the raise hand feature as well. But I've noted that Christy Green has some observations to make, as does Helena von Koller. And if John will allow them to be present, we'll unmute them, and then we can hear from them. Christy, I think you're good to go, so do please take the floor.
Yeah, so the substance of what I'm thinking about was really captured in my questions about the sort of personal and psychological toll of being a patriot or someone who may be in exile. I'm in a state in the United States, Louisiana, where a mere 18% of our electorate has just elected a governor who has invited people who don't like his laws to leave the state. And we've had some high-profile political people do just that. So I was really interested to hear from others what their sense was. I never had the conversation directly with Johan. I always felt it impolite to sort of ask, how do you feel about your state? It seems a little sensitive. So I don't know that we discussed these issues explicitly, but I'm interested in knowing if anyone has similar reflections. I think what Jeremy Gunn just mentioned about what Johan learned in going to that conference in Nigeria, was it, about how he didn't understand his own country. That seems very revealing. My first visit to Africa was in 2008, a conference that Johan and I did in Durham. Christa Rautenbach was there. And at one point, we were discussing the issue of hate speech. And I was thinking, sort of from an American perspective, we have a rather absolutist understanding of some of our rights in hate speech and would not tolerate any sort of censorship or dialing back. But I was quickly corrected by many in the group assembled about African understandings of rights and responsibility and the kinds of things that can and should be said. So just offering those questions about patriotism in exile and this sense that Johan did understand those experiences.
I think, Chrissy, that's incredibly helpful. I would look to any of our participants who want to respond to make some observations. I reflect on what I tried to articulate earlier on in this seminar, the idea that Johan was unquestionably a patriot, a fierce loyalty to his country of birth, but he was a critical friend, and at times he was highly critical. I sometimes sensed when I encountered him in America that he was pining for South Africa. And then when I met him elsewhere in Africa, I always thought he wanted to be back home at Emory. So there was a bit of the quixotic in him as well. But again, I welcome views from others who knew him better and in whom he may have confided. While I wait for people to come forward either in the chat or to use the raise hand feature, I wonder, John, if you could bring in Helena van Koller so she can speak about her particular memories of Johan as, I think, a PhD examiner, a mentor, and in all other ways, someone who struck fear into her. Helen.
Hi, Mark. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, thank you.
Yes, I must say, a bit on a personal note, I'm honest if I say, as a young academic and a student, the thought of Professor Johan van der Vyver was a bit daunting. So the thought of meeting this professor in person when you've just read all of his books and articles, I remember the first time that I met him was actually at the first ACLAS conference, and our first president, Professor Pieter Duvenage, who was the supervisor of my PhD, actually had to introduce me to Professor Johan because I was too scared to introduce myself. So Professor Pieter Duvenage introduced me to Professor Johan, and yeah, I think after that, we've met year after year at these conferences, and I was just always amazed, not just by his academic insight, but also, his fitness and his enthusiasm. He loved a cold beer, and boy, was he fit. I'll never forget, we went to the I-Class conference in Oxford. I think it was about 2016. And typically, like South Africans, the rand against the pound the exchange rate is horrible. So if you can save $1 or $2, you do that. So I got the train to Oxford, and where the bus stopped, I decided, well, it can't be that far. I think it was St. Hugh's College. I'll just walk with my suitcase to St. Hugh's College. Oh boy, and I walked and I walked and I walked. And I mean, I was young and fit, and I got there and I thought, never again. This was absolutely terrible. And there I bumped into Professor Johan van der Vyver, and I think he must have been like in his early 80s, maybe late 70s, and standing there with his tweed jacket and his suitcase, and he said, he also took a bit of a walk. And I thought, oh boy, if he can walk the same route that I just walked, I mean, I was just so amazed, and I decided I'll never complain again. And that just that thought, I'll always remember. And he kind of, in everything that he did, he had that kind of work ethic and that enthusiasm. And that's how I will always remember him. So I can honestly say now I regard him not only as a mentor, but also as a colleague. And yes, I'm still a bit scared of him, even now if I think back, but he's become a dear friend and a colleague and someone that I really look up to. And that's all from my side. Thanks, Mark.
I think, Helen, and many of us would agree that when someone that we idolized, as we idolized Johan, ends up becoming a friend, is the most valuable thing imaginable. We're coming to the end of our time, and I think, Yolanda, if you're willing, we would love to hear from you, because if nothing else has become plain, it's the respect and the love which the academic community had and continues to have for your father. So, Yolanda, please feel free to share your reflections.
Thank you. And I'm laughing at Helena van Koller's description of my dad always running ahead of everyone. And this also reminds me, Mark, I don't know if you remember when we were in Rabat, Jeremy Gunn was there, you were there, I was there, Carl Durham was there, and we all took a day off and went to Fez. And I just got this watch, so I was counting steps, and my dad was already 88. And he did 17,000 steps that day. He ended up walking into someone's house in Fez. Those of you who've been to Fez, it's a labyrinth of little streets, etc. And when we got to where we thought we were going to have lunch, we all had to still walk back, and he kept up with us. And the same in Ethiopia, he went down that Lalibela church into pitch darkness. Pieter Duvenage was there with his wife. So we have very fond memories of him being very fit. And I'm very happy to say I inherited this. I think from my side, really just a personal note. When my dad passed away, it was very sudden. And as a family, I think we were all very shocked. And I saved the messages of condolence that I got from members of A-Class and the Emory community, also other South African people who knew him. And Mark, so I want to thank you for your wonderful chairing or hosting this very touching tribute. And most of the speakers spoke about his academic career, but Mark, if you allow me, I would like to read what you wrote to us when my father passed. He said, "The passing of a father is the passing of an era. Your grief must be unbearable, and I want to assure you of my love and my prayers. But you won't mourn your father alone. We have lost a friend, a scholar, a mentor, and an occasionally grouchy but sometimes animated companion. His fight for justice never diminished, notwithstanding the passing of the years. His integrity was undimmed. And then you add, Mark, I've spent most of the day outside in the glare of the African sun, and my face tingles with that burn that comes in the evening when our travels come to an end. One would know that feeling well, and tonight the tingle that burns is the abiding memory of a man from whom I learned so much and whom I slowly grew to love. And then, Mark, you ended the note of condolence with a Bible verse, Matthew 25, verse 23. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. A life well spent, a faithful servant to the end. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the immense and obvious love that you had, that we all had for Yolanda, for dear Johan. Let me bring this tribute to a close. Let me thank once more John, Bernard, his team at Emory, for the seamless organisation and bringing it together. Let me thank Yolanda for sharing so deeply from the bottom of her heart, and for bringing together this distinguished group of friends and colleagues to pay tribute to her dear father, Johan. In the midst of our grief at his passing, we derive great solace from the fact that he lives on in our memories and in our hearts as a man of learning and of principle, who inspired us, who taught us, who loved us, and often made us laugh. We extend our deepest sympathies to Johan's family. We cherish Johan's memory as a scholar, a colleague, a friend, and a human rights legend. Rest eternal, grant unto our brother Johan, and let light perpetual shine upon him. Thank you all very much.